Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining my chat. This is, as was mentioned, going to be about analyzing performance, especially when the metrics don't tell this whole story. But why are we talking about this? I mean, I think we all analyze metrics to some degree. We all look at dashboards. I'm pretty certain that all of you can spot anomalies and KPIs. You go in, you see something looks weird. You look into it a little bit further and then identify an issue, put together a solution, done deal. But what about when it's not as obvious? Are you relying entirely on dashboards, or are you looking under the hood a little more? I got to be honest, I've certainly been guilty of the former on occasion. How about everyone else? Is there, by just quick show of hands, who relies almost entirely on dashboards? It's okay. I know I do sometimes, but all right. Anyway, some people, not everyone, but I'm going to talk a little bit about my approach. So, as was mentioned, I'm currently a consultant, but actually most of my career has been in big tech, primarily Google. The purpose of talking about this today is to suggest a potentially new approach to evaluating performance and thinking like a consultant. And what does that mean? That's kind of like being proactive versus reactive. So, doing regular audits. Also, part of that is forgetting everything you know. So I say that jokingly, but really what I mean is identifying and dismissing biases that you may have. We all are guilty of, you know, having similar circles at work and maybe looking at the same dashboards over and over again, not necessarily getting the full story. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we'll circle back to that a little bit later, but we're going to talk a little bit about systems thinking and my approach with an example. So next slide. Systems thinking, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this term. It's really just looking holistically at everything that's happening, all the different components in your business, and how do they all work together to create an understanding of what's going on. This model right here is called a congruency model. Some of you may have seen it in business school or work, but it's the core components here, and these are pieces that enable you to execute on your strategy or not. We've heard the phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast, but it really applies to all these four components here. And I remember them by thinking about software versus hardware. So on the left side, we've got the software, which is people and culture and everything that goes into that. And then on the right side, we've got the hardware, more kind of tangible pieces like tasks and capabilities, and then also architecture, reporting lines, and interdependencies. But performance gaps stem from problems in one or more of these quadrants, and they often can derail your strategy. So let's jump in. So what is my approach? If I'm hired as a consultant, what does that look like? Why was I enlisted? That's the number one thing I want to understand from the executive group that's bringing me in. And for you or anyone that's not in consulting, most of you, I'm sure, you think about why do you or other leaders think there's a performance gap? So really try to outline like what's making you think that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a particular client that I worked with about a year ago. They're B2B SaaS client. When I met with them, they had some anecdotes of some clients leaving, but only slight changes in the aggregate support KPIs over 6 months. They had some feedback from their teams that they were strapped. Their monthly revenue, recurring revenue was dropping a bit. So they really want to know what was going on. So at this point, I've heard their pitch. I've taken a lot of notes. And now I want to really try to find out for myself what's going on. And I start by doing some data analysis. So the kind of this portion of it is referred to as exploratory data analysis. If you're into that, awesome. If this is your wheelhouse, great. But if it's not, then I would suggest making friends with your business intelligence team. Data can be really informative, but it can also be misleading. It's critical to have an expert eye on how your data is being presented and what it does and doesn't mean. So I would suggest hiring an analyst with industry knowledge if you don't have anyone to turn to. But instead of getting into all the details of what I would do here in exploratory data analysis, we'll just kind of assume that I did that and then move on to the next part, which is thinking about how do we gather insights through disaggregation. So the next slide is the case. So talking about this particular case of this client, this B2B SaaS client, These are their metrics from the dashboard. So CSAT, you look at this and you're like, nah, it looks fine to me. Aggregated dashboard shows slight CSAT dip, but really nothing most people would even notice or be alarmed about. Next slide is a similar aggregated, but for churn. And here we see, depending on who's looking at it's not a huge jump. I mean, it's only 0.7% increase over 6 months, but relative to the starting point, it's a 39% jump. So this probably warrants some investigation. So what I want to do next is disaggregate this and see, can I look at this more with a kind of fine-tooth comb and understand what's happening? So then I move to the next slide, which is disaggregation. So it's CSAT by customer segment, which they had, and I was able to pull this out. What you see is the basic customers and mid-level customers pretty consistent CSAT across the board, but we're starting to see a trend here with discontent among high-value customers. So that's definitely worth noting, and we'll kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. Then looking at the disaggregated data for churn, then it's an even more clear sign of what's going on. There's the basic and mid-level are pretty consistent, and the churn for high-value customers really shot up here. So that seems to be the story right away, but I want to understand more. How do I get more information? So the next step is investigating through interviews. So if possible, I want to talk to everyone. So I already spoke with some of the top brass about why they were bringing me in. Are there other leaders I can talk to get additional perspectives? Then I want to go to middle management. What are they seeing? The frontline staff, like the account managers that are dealing with customer issues. What are they really feeling? What's not being reported? What's not showing up in the metrics? And then customers, of course, because we want to see what is their experience? How has that changed, if it has? Is there anything worth noting on their side? So then I jump into, what did I find? So we found pretty similar information from a leadership perspective. They said some customers leaving, but it's kind of unclear. They didn't see anything obvious in the data. So what's the deal? What's happening here? Middle management said, look, resources are really tight. We actually had a layoff at the end of last year. We're having to make some tough trade-offs. We have a new pooled support model. It seems efficient on paper, but we're not really sure. The account managers said, look, we're really seeing is high-value clients expect dedicated service, which we used to have, and we promised them, but we now don't have that anymore. Some of our best team members are leaving because they're not really happy about the fact they can't deliver the quality service they wanted to as they could before. And customers are kind of mirroring that. They're saying, look, we used to have dedicated support, and what's the deal? Why did this happen? We're not happy about this. We're paying a lot of money to use your product, and we're not happy with the support. So that starts to kind of build more and more of the story here. And as you can see, kind of thinking all the way back to the congruence model I was just showing you, we've got on the people side, we've got, top talent is unchallenged. They're potentially leaving. From a culture perspective, we found out there's a layoff, and maybe there's some fear of reporting. Maybe there's a culture of silence. Tasks and capabilities, they seem to be misaligned now because some of the people that were dedicated support are now doing pooled support, and they're not happy about that. So we already see right away 3 out of the 4 different kind of components of the congruence model are affecting the outcome here. So this is really worth noting, and we'll kind of go into my analysis that I share with the leadership team. So what do I do then? How do I share that? So first, we want to pull together everything we got. So what did we uncover? We uncovered what we didn't know before. That is, at the end of last year, there was a layoff. They got rid of 15% of account management staff. They removed their white glove service. They re-tiered top clients to more pooled support versus dedicated account management. So this is all kind of coming together for the story. And then going to the next slide, which is case study communicating the narrative. How do I craft this and bring this to leadership team? So I pull in all the data, all the interview findings, and at the same time, I want to think about, are there sensitivities? Like, are there things the executive team it may be hard for them to hear. Like if there's a culture of silence, how do they feel about that? And they, you know, might not be happy about the fact that people aren't speaking up. Business impact, how is this affecting them? And how do I kind of cater the story to show what's happened and how do we turn that around? And then I blend the findings into an initial report where I determine kind of where were they right in that first intake, and how do I kind of like smooth it out and show you were right to some degree, and I found more. So the customers are leaving you right, and specifically, I determined it's high value customers. Where were your blind spots? The account managers knew. Why didn't the executives know? How do we avoid this in the future? Then I jump into here are some ideas. Here are some solutions that I want to come forward with. I do a little more analysis, and I determined that the layoff they did was actually counterproductive. The churn caused by that um, significantly exceeded their savings from the layoffs. So, um, counter to the initial assumptions, the optimal solution is to move towards high value customers versus away, to bring back the white glove support, but then also focus on transitioning lower customers, lower tier customers to more pooled support. And then how do we build up that pooled support so it's even better? AI chatbots, improve self-service, et cetera. And then also one of the things we found was things weren't bubbling up to the surface. So how do we implement recognition for those who sound the alarm? And ultimately, this was kind of a win-win scenario where we brought back the white glove service and we were able to increase operational efficiency. Saw a bunch of great numbers here. Yay, metrics complied. They don't always, as you know, but in this case, they did. And takeaway is really just using systems thinking for analysis. It enables holistic understanding of problem solving and lasting results. So you're thinking about the problem versus the symptom. How do we, how, how um, how do we avoid missing the signs in the future? So being proactive, thinking about doing regular exploratory data analysis beyond the dashboards, regular interviews, and in reality, if you're in-house, this is looks more like skip levels and that sort of thing to gain information from kind of different altitudes within the organization. And being a systems thinker, combining data and anecdotes to craft a story, using this congruence model to audit the health of each component and figure out how does that all fit together and how is that affecting performance. So sorry, I kind of rushed through all that and hope that was helpful. But now we're jumping into the breakout, and would love to hear your thoughts on ultimately if someone shadowed your team for a week, would their findings align with what your dashboards show? And consider the underlying factors that may strongly influence your customers' performance, but are hidden from the numbers.